have Karrie Keyes, who's stellar monitor engineer of Pearl Jam and co-founder of soundgirls.org. We have Salim Akram, who's the monitor engineer for Billie Eilish and also an accomplished musician. And then we have Dana Wachs, who is an audio engineer, tour manager, and composer musician. We may have our friend Jerry Lopez and Jim Yakabuski joining the panel later on if they can make it. Both of them actually managed to find some work, so we can't be upset with them for being out doing things. So we're here today to speak about diversity, or more correctly, the lack thereof in this industry that we all love so much. I think first thing that needs to be done is to shine a light on and recognize the fact that we have an issue. You know, in an ideal world, you would hope and expect that the percentages of employment within any given industry would somewhat resemble the demographics of the country, but that's not even close to the case. I was surprised to find out that women make up about, somewhere around 50% of the population of this country and only account for about 5% of our industry. That's abysmal. For comparison, in construction, it's about 10%. So they're doing twice as well as we are. And for the BIPOC, it's about 40% of the population of the country, and the numbers in our industry are about the same, about 5%. So that's not a very good picture of diversity in our industry. This type of disparity is clearly systemic and reflective of ongoing social issues in this country, but as the world is improving, hopefully, and us being a progressive industry, we all here feel like it's incredibly important that we do more to alter our future. So that's why we're here today. And we will certainly talk about things we can do to hopefully improve this situation. But I think it's also important to speak about what are the roadblocks that are keeping us in the past, so to speak, in our industry. Karrie, you want to start us off with that?
Sure. I think there's roadblocks at every level for women entering the field, and then it is harder for women of color, and there's barriers for people of color as well, and I think some of it starts at the educational level of what high schools are equipped and even offer arts programs, who has access to those programs to begin with, where the counselors are steering those kids. There's plenty of schools that have no arts programs. So, I don't know the actual statistics on the high schools, but every time, it breaks my heart every time I hear that arts funding for schools is being cut, because people aren't all scientists or interested in math or interested in history or English, and that's where schools typically are sending people. Now it's technology. So it kills me, because if you cut the arts funding and the programming out of the schools, you've just eliminated 25% of your student population, telling them that they don't matter, right? So I think that's the first barrier. And then where are our arts institutes and our trade schools, where are they recruiting people? What schools are they going to and showcasing and introducing their programs? Then there's the cost of tuition. Who has, my parents wouldn't have had money to send. I ended up going to a sound school, but it was not in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. They wouldn't be able to fund it. I wouldn't advise anybody to take out student loans to go, right, at that price, because you're going to be paying them back forever. And then once you get into the schools, of how the instructors are engaging and interacting with the student population. Some schools do really well. Some, I have heard from women that have attended them that they are fairly bullied by the instructors. And, there'll be one or two women in the program. So they're not getting support there. And then once you get out of school, I mean, we all know that it takes a lot of work and time to get a job or an internship in this industry. It's very hard. Um, so, women and people of color are facing even further barriers of those entry points, just because the people that are in power and are in hiring positions or internship positions have their own biases and just, they're either excluding them or not considering them, or giving them the opportunity, right? Sometimes it's just being given the opportunity. So it makes it really hard. And then once, even after you're given the opportunity of the continuing always, because our industry is freelance, right? So we're always looking for new clients and new artists or new employers to work with, right? Some of us are still, make up our income working for 4 or 5 different people, right? All the time. So it's the constant looking for work. So those barriers still exist even after you're working in the industry. So I think I was just gonna, I just think we need to do better if in our positions, whatever they are, of making sure that we're uplifting everybody, right? And if we have to go out of our way to make sure that internships are available, not, available to everybody that wants them, not just to the people that their parents can support them while they do a year internship that's not paid, right? So those are some of the barriers.
I just met, just to put a cap on your point, I just met a young woman recently who had aspirations of being in the industry and told me that she tried twice to go through programs to get into production, and that the instructors were so discouraging the entire way through that she ended up quitting and moving on to another industry, and that's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I was discussing with her, I think a big part of the problem is a lot of these instructors are people that come from the old days of the industry, and they've kind of, gotten off the road, or, gotten to the point where their ears aren't so fresh anymore. And, so now they've gone into teaching and they brought their old ideas with them. So I think we need definitely a changing of the guard in the instructor side of things.
Right.
Dana, putting aside all the issues that you have as a professional engineer, we'll get to that later, but what kind of roadblocks did you come up against on your way into trying to fight your way into this industry?
So I did not go to a formal college or school for sound. I did go to college, but I am essentially self-taught. I've had some mentors along the way. They were very few and extremely patient, and I thank them forever and ever. But I started really young, not only as a woman, but as a teenager. And I was doing sound before I could even drink legally, which, just in case mom's watching, I didn't start drinking until I was of legal age.
Of course not.
No, I really didn't. I worked in a bar, and I remember my first drink on my 21st birthday. Anyway, back to the point at hand. Being young was... and being female was kind of a 2-for-1 special as far as the abuse that I was handed out. And, I came up in a punk rock DIY musical universe, and I was applying a lot of just the gumption from that scene into fighting my way through. So, I got a lot of work when I really started learning how to mix well. And but the whole process helped me develop pretty bad habits, as in starting off in a very defensive manner a lot of times.
Sure.
And I was still young. I mean, you know, I was 19, 20 when I was learning all this. And people would come to me and, you don't know what you're doing. And I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm going to show you, you know, and I was ready to fight. And as we all know, as adults, that's not the right way to go into a job, a professional experience. So I would say that was, you know, teaching myself as a self-discipline, being female, and then just being quite young when I started. Those were all battles that I had to fight. And I'm not young anymore, you know, but I'm still a female, and these are still issues that there's still issues there that I have to deal with. But my heart goes out to people starting off quite young and not really knowing the game. I mean, back then we didn't have internet. I didn't know any female engineers or anybody who worked on the technical side that was female. I just happened to grow up in a really great scene in DC that was really encouraging to women. And then when I decided to look for bigger opportunities in New York, you know, I hit a wall that I didn't know was there, because where I grew up and started learning was very generous and accepting and very encouraging. So.
Excellent. Salim, did you feel marginalized on your way into the industry? I mean, more than the, you know, average hazing?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I guess, for maybe people of color in general is just kind of being typecast and put into a box. It's like, oh, he's black, so he's only going to do R&B and hip hop. And then people are, quote unquote, shocked that I can mix a metal band well or mix a rock band well. So I think just the unconscious bias that, you know, a person of color or a woman or somebody that's, you know, on the surface is traditionally not what you'd expect to be mixing a country band, to be mixing a rock band, or whatever the case may be. I think that was a lot of just not even getting an opportunity or even being considered. Not like, I think it's more of the mentality of it versus like, I'm going to be consciously racist to not hire him, or consciously be, you know, discriminatory. It's just that you don't even get considered because, oh, he's black. He probably won't even know what to do or how to do it. He wouldn't enjoy it. But at the end of the day, like I said, when somebody's like, wow, that was like one of the best sounding shows ever, you can tell, like, it's kind of not necessarily like a backhanded compliment, but you could tell that a lot of the times those types of comments are generally coming from a level of surprise, being like, oh, wow, I didn't think it would have achieved this result. And I think that's consistent with a lot of people, you know what I'm saying, that don't get the opportunity just because they're put into a box based on what they look like, you know what I'm saying? So I guess painting with like a very, very broad stroke, you know what I'm saying? I think it's very similar, you know, to what Dana and Karrie were saying as well too, but that's just another added layer. That if you're a woman of color, you know what I'm saying, then it's like a whole nother set of circumstances that people don't even consider themselves being a gatekeeper, that I think should be considered like your unconscious bias in that regard. I think now it's more common to have people have, you know, more diverse taste in music, but growing up, when I did, it was like you listen to hip hop and that was that, you know what I'm saying? If you listen like all your other stuff, like metal and rock, if you were a black person, like, you know, a person of color or whatever, they're like kind of like silent guilty pleasures. You didn't go around telling people you listened to Metallica or Rage Against the Machine. It was just, you know, Teddy Riley and R&B, and that was the thing. And then you eventually found people who had similar taste in music to you, which led me to my bandmates and, you know, that type of stuff. But I think more now it's considerably easier to have people have a vast taste in music. So yeah, I think that was probably when you realize like, oh yeah, you just kind of keep it moving. But I think more people aren't aware of the unconscious bias.
Yeah, I was speaking to a woman engineer last week, and she was talking about when she started out, she mixed front of house for folk bands. Except this folk band also played rock, or they played electric. She was mixing them when they were doing acoustic, and they told her, and they were women, and they told her next tour we're gonna play electric, so we're probably gonna have to find a rock guy to mix us. And, you know, she was just like, I can mix rock too, you know, and this was you know, it was a long time. It was 20 years ago when this happened, but that's just how people think. And that was from women that were playing those guitars, telling her that. So, and then they're like, oh yeah, why would we think you can't mix electric guitars? Like they just hadn't even thought about it.
Yeah. Well, that just shows how deep it goes.
It's coming up through as a house engineer before I went on tour. You end up mixing all different types of music all the time, and the scheduling can be random. And then I would make a point sometimes to just ask for something that I wanted to do. I ended up working with a lot of jazz and noise artists like John Zorn, which was, you know, always an exciting evening of, you know, you have no idea what anybody's going to show up with. And having access to that varied of bands and musicians, that really helped at least give me like, yeah, I can mix whatever you want, you know, just I've got the background for my house job. That really helped me just go over that little hump for sure. Because, you know, nobody would look at me and assume that I can mix hip hop when I worked at Green Street, which did all the original Def Jam records. So, you know, people will judge you by the way you look for sure. Yeah. But it's hopefully, I think these days that people might take a little bit more effort to look at your resume first.
Yeah.
You know, I hope.
One of the questions that we got is, do we feel like things are getting better or things have gotten better? I mean, I know, Karrie, you're kind of on the front lines. I mean, do you see, do you feel like from your members, are you getting the message that things are getting any easier?
I don't know if they're getting easier because those same barriers still exist. And they haven't just gone away.
Sure.
But there are, I see more women in the field. So then every time there's more women, more, people of color working, it breaks down that barrier a little bit. Because now people are like, oh, I've worked with lots of women. I've worked with lots of people of color, and it's fine. But I think those barriers of entering the industry are still there. And some people are aware of them and have gone out of their ways to address those issues. So, there are sound companies that it's easier that they will look at your resume or call you or take references. And there's still other companies that's just super hard to have anybody look at your information seriously. I think with the younger artists, it might be easier. I think they don't see everything I need a rock guy to mix this because we're playing electric guitars. I don't think they think.
Yeah, hopefully that's going away.
Yeah.
With the.
I feel like with younger artists as well too, I think it's more traditional now for people to kind of handpick their crews and be surrounded by their personal friends, as opposed, unfortunately, I think we're living in the moment where the change that needs to happen has been identified, but unfortunately it's moving at a slower pace in the moment than actually it's kind of growing, from the bottom up at this point. Because a lot of the up and coming artists are considerably, more conscious of the inequalities that, exist between people of color and women and trans and all the actual different, marginalized groups of people, that those types of groups and bands are actually being more successful now in bringing people and putting them in those places that they're already comfortable with, that are in their position already. So I think over the course of time, I think it'll be more exponential than what it is right now, because I feel like we're kind of in the phase of, I guess, the back nine of an older generation that's slowly starting to either get off the road and become aware. And there's a newer generation of, young production managers, young engineers, and people that are actually fusing with the older engineers and older crews for whatnot, that are kind of just changing the culture. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, I actually interviewed probably 2 years ago with a band that specifically wanted to hire women, people of color, trans and queer technicians and crew, and everybody was getting paid the same exact amount of money, including the musicians. They really wanted to drive home the egalitarian aspect of that tour, and also give people a big tour to put on their resume for future work, because normally, say, a trans sound engineer wouldn't, may come up against some walls, but they have this huge tour under their belt that you just can't deny, so that kind of mentality I only started seeing with this one interview recently, but I'm starting to see a little bit more now. I know that Bikini Kill, for example, they hire a lot of women, a lot of queer and trans crew and support staff, so making a point of it is definitely a way to not only give a person a job that needs it and deserves it, but also give them infrastructure for future work. So hopefully that trend continues.
Really quick plug, since you mentioned it. Karrie is going to be hosting a really wonderful discussion panel on gender bias for people in transition. So definitely keep your eye out for that. She should have information coming for that soon.
Yeah.
Great.
So another topic, another wonderful topic for another day.
I think we have it scheduled for August 30th, I believe. But we should have information up by next week. So.
Fantastic, thanks. I just want to push that forward. So it seems like we're moving into, we've identified at least some of the major hurdles, and it seems like we're starting to address things that can be done. I want to take a step back where we were before and talk about education, because to me, I think that's the most important thing, is to get more people from the bottom up, as Salim said, to bring people forward. So I'd like to talk about some organizations, resources, friendly education opportunities, things like that people on the panel are aware of, so that we can make our viewers aware that there are these resources out there and that they are welcome in this industry. I think Sound Girls is a good start. Karrie, can you tell us a little bit about Sound Girls in case people don't know?
Sound Girls, we started about 7 years ago now. The original intent was to find the first was to find other women in the industry, because there was about, I think, 5 of us on a panel for AES. And we had such a great time, and we all talked about how different our careers would have been if we had known each other and been able to call each other. So that was the original intent, was to find and support and be able to network with other women. And then one of the issues that we wanted to address was the lack of high profile engineers in the industry that were women, because our trade magazines can't feature women every month, and they're usually only featuring the engineers on the top selling tours anyway. So one of our goals was to do a feature profile, which Dana is going to be our feature profile next month.
Hey.
Yeah, each month. So that other people could see their achievements. And then also when you Googled women sound engineer, maybe something would come up, which now it does. So we're happy about that. And I remember Michelle saying, she goes, every month, she goes, what if we run out of women? And I'm like, we won't. Let's just try it. And we haven't ran out yet. So that's been really great. At this point, we do a lot of advocacy work in the industry to make sure and sit on different advisory boards for diversity and inclusion, and just keep forging allies and pathways to make sure that we can start breaking down some of these barriers. And then, when, we do a lot of ongoing educational programming for in all areas, you know, it's not just live sound. So there's a lot of post-production stuff going on, and recording and mastering, and
which, as we said, is of the tantamount importance. So if you're not familiar with Sound Girls, please go to soundgirls.org and become a member. Doesn't matter. You don't have to be a woman. You don't have to
Nope.
be, you can be in any group. All are welcome.
Any group, everyone's welcome.
Yes, please. So get on there. There's a lot of great resources. If you sign up, you will get information about attending classes in your area, things like that. There's some incredible resources. And Karrie, can you tell us about the EQL directory too that you host?
Yeah, so probably about 4 years ago, you know, we kept getting inquiries all the time. Can you recommend women? We want to hire women. And we are like, okay, we need to put together a database so everybody can put their information in and we can send this out to people. Which we did, and it was just, it was pretty much a grassroots, easy database. You could enter your information and upload your resume, and that was kind of it. A couple of years ago, Spotify took that and worked with us and built it into a beautiful directory, which we would have never financially been able to do. So I think last time I checked, there's over 2,000, maybe 2,500 people that have entered their information. And, you know, you can pick by what field you're in. So there's post-production, there's recording, there's film, there's live, there's production for live. And I would say, you know, last year we were sending that link out to people that were inquiring about 30 times a week. Of course, this year it's not going out very much because there's no work. So. But I encourage everybody to get your information in there. And hopefully we'll be back to work soon.
And then we should also mention the POC and audio directory, which is a similar resource for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And they stand on providing a database of people that are looking for respect, regardless of, you know, ability, age, faith, socioeconomic status, all those things that, all the typical roadblocks that people fall into. So no matter what group you fall into, you know, if you do want to work in this industry, we obviously want you to work in this industry. So make sure that you have your information up and available so that people can find you. I know that sometimes when we go to hire people, if we can't find people in those groups to hire them, we can't hire you. So you know.
I'm going to post a link for a bunch of directories right now.
Please do. Thank you. That's fantastic. Dana, do you want to talk about any resources that you know of for people to people in marginalized groups to up their skills, or to you know, gain awareness or exposure, I should say, not awareness?
I mean, well, all the resources that I know of, I've gotten from Sound Girls. So,
yeah.
But one thing that I have been able to do is typically on the Sound Girls Facebook page, if I'm going on tour, I'll put my tour dates up, and people have responded, "Oh, can I shout at you one of these days?" And I've had a couple Sound Girls come to sound checks, and you know, even if the sound check, if I feel that it's okay and I clear it with the tour manager, it's been great to have Sound Girls shadow me and just ask me questions. And I feel that that would have been an opportunity that I would have loved to have when I was younger, not just to get into the show, but just to see how a sound check will run. And you know, every band runs a sound check differently, so this could be I would say the Sound Girls Facebook page is probably an underused tool as far as getting a real life experience. So don't be shy, basically.
Yeah.
Not every tour can, I mean, you know, there are some bands and productions that won't let visitors in during sound check, totally understood. But you know, it doesn't hurt to ask. I don't think anybody's going to be bothered.
Yeah.
So
there's always time after sound check or during line check
Mhm.
or during, you know, there's.
during the support band sound check. Just
There you go.
kidding. Just kidding.
So I think it's important. You know, I didn't realize until I got to be the age that I'm in. You know, I started teaching a few years ago, and I feel like now, especially, you know, the more that I talk with Karrie, that we all are, we owe a debt for the career that we've had, and that I feel personally that I need to share that and teach, and, you know, to anyone. I certainly don't participate in any kind of marginalization of groups, but I think we all need to, and I would post a challenge to anyone out there who does have industry experience to reach out and find people in the next generation and help them get a foothold, especially people of color and women, because we truly do need more of those resources. Did we lose Jim? We had Jim for a minute. I was just about to say hi to him.
Oh, hi.
Are you
Do you
there?
guys see me?
Yeah,
There
Jim's
you are.
here.
We didn't lose you. Welcome, Jim.
Thank
Yep.
you.
For joining us. I know you got busy stuff. Hopefully your kid got into college, and
Well, took the first step, and just like you guys were talking about, took the first step of you know, getting excited about it and applying and checking the place out, and we'll see where it goes from there.
so I'm not sure where I saw you pop in, but not sure exactly where you got into the conversation. But you know, when you and I joined the industry, it was kind of a different road and you know, that's part of the reason why we're in this situation we're in now, that, you know, there weren't opportunities. Are you aware, Jim, of any? We're just naming resources
Right.
for marginalized groups to, you know, find an inroad in education for our industry.
Yeah, it was quite different. I mean, I'm 57 now, so when I got my sort of first foot in the door was in 1984 or 5. So it was a lot different. And Western Canada at that time had a booming club circuit. So people who wanted to be sound men, sound girls, we would, you know, we could find a way to get in. The big barrier for us was the border, you know, getting someone in the States to hire us. And that took 5 years for me to get a break, and it was a break, and I had to kind of jump across and say I was visiting friends and go and do some work until I got my green card. But yeah, I'd say these days, you know, it is so tough with the way the industry is now, and there's no jobs for anyone. So it's going to be tougher when we get back, I think, for everyone to find work. Because I think it'll just sort of sneak back in. It won't just all of a sudden be happening and everyone's on tour and we're looking for people. But I love the idea, Dana, what you said, just watch you work one day. Can I be of assistance? I mean, be of service to people who, you know, are already out there doing it, and your name tends to float to the top of the list when they're thinking of somebody to recommend.
Actually, the sound girl that came and shadowed me in Seattle ended up working at Showbox. So it does work, you know.
Yeah.
And Showbox is a great venue if you don't know it. It's a good large club, great sound system, great staff. So I mean, it definitely works. I literally introduced her to head of production, who happened to be a woman, and you know, she wrote to me maybe a month later and said, I got a job, you know. So it does work.
Yeah.
Yeah, be present and don't be shy. You know, no's do not hurt you. So, you know.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, we
You're
lost
on
your
mute,
mic.
Mike. You're on mute, buddy.
Sorry. I had somebody was
Damn you,
pounding on my
Ben.
door, so I muted my mic. And yeah. I reached around blindly and thought I hit it. Okay. It's been too long since I've touched a mixer. I forgot what all the buttons.
I know.
Kidding.
Yeah. So I'm sure everyone has one in their kitchen, like I do, right?
Yeah, my tiny studio apartment, sure. Instead of a fridge.
I don't have a kitchen, but I do have a mixer. Anyway,
Yes.
so what I was saying is that please, we're all imploring anyone watching to get out there and don't allow yourself to be marginalized. No's only hurt if you let them. You know, they don't hurt at all if you just move on. And it's although it's not right, and we're all trying to make a better place, I think you know, the point is that there are a lot of people in this industry that do not care what or who you are, just care about, you know, do you value the work, and will you bring your best every day? And that's the only thing that matters. There are plenty of us out there, so you know, don't think that we're all evil is, I guess, the message.
Yeah, I think one takeaway for me is that I just need to bring it up more when I'm talking to the sound company, vendor people, tour managers, production managers that I have worked with over the years. I am probably guilty of it just hasn't come to my mind as much to until recently to recommend a girl, or at least like we were saying, that they're considered. You know, just let's consider some marginalized folks for these positions, and it's more on my mind now because of this webinar.
That's
yeah, I think overall, in general, I think this just type of general awareness to people, I think, is extremely helpful, because one, it makes the hiring people more aware that, oh my God, there's actually a pretty huge gap in these particular areas, but also for the people that are on the other side of the gap, it actually puts, you know, a personal face and accessibility to people who are actually willing to help. And, you know, if somebody has a discouraging experience, that type of experience is generally, hopefully, an isolated one. You know what I'm saying? It's not the overall, you know, vibe of the industry. You know what I mean? So once they actually talk to somebody like myself or anybody else on this panel, or, you know, another person, Sound Girls type of thing, I think it opens up another layer of accessibility that I think it's helpful to break down that barrier of like, do I really want to do this? Because that situation was so awful. And then when you actually talk to somebody that's like, hey, actually, that's not normal. That's not, that person you the person you just met was actually just an asshole. Like, here is actually a group of people, here's a different community of inclusion, awareness that you know, we're generally trying to promote and operate at, versus that one guy who's, you know, I used to work for Metallica back in the 80s type of dude that's just like the worst that nobody wants to be around. I think more awareness like this, I think, is extremely helpful, just to kind of have people, you know, have somewhere to turn that's actually legitimate type of thing.
Right.
I'd like to point out also, like on the flip side, the people that are doing the hiring, you know, I know that as a woman, I have a name that could be either male or female, and I send out my resume, and then I have a phone meeting. They're like, "Oh, you're a woman." Yes. And it's like, "Oh, the band's never toured with a woman before. I don't know if this is going to work out." It's like, well, you know, what's the old adage? Don't knock it till you try it. You know, it's maybe nothing changes. Maybe things change for the better. It's the people who are doing the hiring need to be a little bit more open, and you know, even if it's never been done before in that organization, if it's the right person for the job, no matter whatever the case might be, you know, that should be viewed as an opportunity as opposed to a problem to solve. So if anybody is listening that does that, is in that position to hire people, you know, that having a woman on the bus, or maybe a Muslim that wants to pray at a specific time of the day on the bus or in a venue, that shouldn't be a problem. That should be an opportunity to be not just inclusive for the sake of being inclusive, but also you can learn so much from different genders, different cultures across the board, you know, different religions, everything. It can only enrich unless somebody wants it to be a problem. So don't be afraid of hiring just because it hasn't been done before.
Yeah, and I would say don't think that because someone's a woman, hey, this is perfect. We have someone who can go out on a band with an all female band or something. I mean, it's not always. I don't think it always has to be pigeonhole.
Yeah.
I think. And I've learned from experience that having a woman on a tour with mostly guys is super refreshing and great for everyone's morale. And if it's good people to begin with, it's just a much better hang to have a couple girls or some folks that aren't exactly like us on the tour.
There's an English band I once toured with, and I was the first woman that had been in their situation, and they said, "This is great. It's a lot less, I don't know, laddish, So it was a shift, positive shift for them. So.
Yeah, I think it always is. Anytime we can experience new things, and change is usually a good thing when eyes are open.
I just thought of something in particular, just maybe more of a perspective thing that I think the powers that be in the hiring partners don't particularly always take into consideration when it comes to budgeting and whatnot on like particularly smaller scale tours. If you are touring with the women, the actual needs of like, okay, there's a bunch of grown men that are 30 or married, and like setting the budget aside for actually like personal comfort in terms of, do the people feel comfortable sharing a bed? Do they, these little small things that I think if you're the only female on a tour, like I've heard stories from some of my female friends where it's just shrugged off. It's like, oh, just go share the room with one of the guys. It's fine. Fuck it. No big deal. It's just like, I got a boyfriend or I'm married. That's like not a good look. And that's looked at as like this catastrophic thing where it's like, well, it's another expense, blah, blah, blah. But it's at the end of the day, it's like, taking it into consideration, that particular thing is looked at as more of like a negative thing versus how do we make this work, and kind of just explain to the person, well, this is what everybody does. You decided to come on the road, so this is like a choice you made, but at the same time, that's not the way it should be handled. And it's really, luckily, the females that we've had on the tour, everybody's really friendly and nice, and everybody's comfortable. But at what point, does the person feel uncomfortable? I don't think that's taken into consideration as much as it probably should be a lot of the time.
When it comes to that sort of decision or that sort of ultimatum, when you are the person who's taking the job and perhaps really, really, really needs that job, say it's February and you haven't had work since November, you end up making some compromises that you might not be comfortable with, and that doesn't help anybody because stress or resentment might boil up, and it's you have to protect yourself in those situations, but hopefully also the people who are in management positions will be open to finding a solution with you, perhaps. But I mean, I've been in a bad position sharing a room with a guy, and I don't wish it on anybody, and it's important to consider this, but also I think if you're being hired in a situation where there might be room shares, state what your concerns are at the top of the tour, because also production managers and tour managers can't read your mind. I think that you have to find a way to approach it because you don't want to seem difficult, which is, an easy label to throw onto somebody who's making demands. Just say like, hey, I've had this experience in the past perhaps, and these are things that both the person who's being hired and the person who's doing the hiring has to be able to communicate about. So don't expect it to be known, but also if you're hiring, think about the questions that you're asking the person that's going to be an essential part of your crew.
Yeah, totally. I think those particular types of questions aren't asked enough, and giving people the opportunity in this space to voice a concern. It's just shrugged off as this is how the tour runs, this is how we do it.
Right.
Either you're in or you're out, but it shouldn't be so, one dimensional in terms of whether the person's comfortable or not, it's still a matter, you know, it's having somebody have to make that choice and there's no discussion about it is a total bummer. I don't think a lot of people are aware of it as much as they should be, how catastrophic it could be or how toxic, or not taking it, like you said, into consideration, you know, a particular, hey, I did this rooming thing in the past. This was a total bummer because the people were OD creeps and it was weird. I don't want to do that again. But if you're the right person for the job, that should be something that people actually take seriously and, you know, make a combination. There's a discussion about how to move forward. And like you said, addressed at the top of the tour. And I've seen way too many situations. Unfortunately, just hearing my female friends' stories, just like, that's generally not the case. It's just, it falls on deaf ears and it's just kind of spinning the cycle. And it's just like you said, you're kind of looked at as, you know, you're being difficult. It's like, well, no, I'm not being difficult. This is actually a situation that nobody should have to deal with, but I have to, type of thing, you know?
Can you, whoever wants to start, but I would think it would be helpful for all of you to share some type of aggression that you have faced that maybe the person inflicting it upon you didn't realize, because I think there is a lot of things that maybe people don't have the worst intentions, but they don't realize that they're being hurtful. And I think it would be helpful to point some of those things out so people that do care, that don't want to marginalize people, but just may not be educated, could benefit from. Whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first. Why
Okay.
not? Sorry. I guess, so one of my most common experiences on tour, typically I'm in a large club, small theater type of tour. I don't always get to carry my own console. Sometimes I do. But one of the things that I experience almost every single day is a little bit too much of a, you know, I don't want to say mansplaining, because that happens a lot, but being a 46-year-old engineer who has been on the road for 20 years, you know, I pretty much know my way around. And if I have a question, I will ask it. I don't know everything. Maybe I've never been to that venue before. I will ask for help if I need it. I appreciate it when people say like, hey, if you need anything, just let me know. But a lot of times there are the people that come in and are just overflowing with suggestions on how I should mix my room and mix the band in this room, and how I should do my job. And I feel like the intention is there, but there's a little bit too much of a concern about how I'm implementing my workflow, for example. Obviously, I'm there, I know what I'm doing as far as my thing, as far as I run my tour and my sound check. But, and I'm not above asking questions or, you know, saying like, how do I get into this sub menu of whatever software if it's not my console? But I think giving people space to, you know, get into their work before jumping on them because maybe you see them as less capable than you is something that I run into a lot. So.
Yeah. I don't encounter it as much as I used to because I live in a Pearl Jam bubble where we always have production and pretty much the same crew. So I'm isolated from a lot of that. But, you know, when I was touring and working with different acts, and sometimes we had production, and sometimes we had half production, and sometimes we just had wedges for the singer. You know, and we go into all different types of situations, from a theater to a stadium to a festival on any given day. You know, once in a while I would encounter a crew, a local crew, a festival crew that really went out of their way to ruin my day. And you know, they always kind of played it off of like, it wasn't because I was a woman, but it was obvious that it was because I was a woman and they were jealous or didn't think I should be mixing whoever I was. But the thing that they forgot is that I was on tour and I dealt with different crews every single day. And that was not the norm. That was a really bad crew that was out to make my life miserable. But most of the crews we went in, we did our job, we left, everything was great. And the thing that those local people, engineers, techs that I encountered that went out of their way to make my life miserable, I still remember them to this day. And I'm in a position and have been in a position over the years that I could have recommended them for gigs. But they're on my list of people that have made my lives miserable, and I will never recommend them for a gig. So, you know, I think that they thought that they were getting one up, showing, I don't know, whatever they needed to make my life miserable. But, you know, in the end, it backfires on people. And I see that happen a lot when we're doing, you know, with Pearl Jam's doing festivals. You know, I'm around the stage most of the day. I'm watching how the crews are treating the other acts coming in. And sometimes it just seems, you know, it's not from our crew, it's from the festival crew, just being unnecessarily going out of their way to make people's lives hard when everybody's just trying to get their stuff on stage and play a festival, right? So, I think that happens to everybody, but I think it happens to people that do not look like what they think a sound engineer should look like more often, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. I've gotten similar. I mean, it's really hard to tag whether like the person will be talking to my tech, like the other engineer, but like I don't even exist 9 times out of the 10. And then when it's like, oh, actually, when you jump in front of the console, it's not every situation. It's just like, oh, it could be sometimes just chalked up to a level of I don't know either one of these two people, and it's just a proximity thing. But there's other times where it's very obvious of like you don't want to address me because you assume that the other person is the person that has the job. And it's like, oh, actually, when I jump in front of the console and start mixing, it's like, oh shit, he's actually the engineer. But like I said, I feel like all this stuff that you have, one, when you're like, I'm kind of in the same bubble that Karrie's in at this point where I kind of we're insulated from all that type of stuff for the most part, but there have been experiences where it's like I said, you're just, if you're a person of color, you're kind of just in a box, you know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, you're on the hip hop show, and just like it comes with this moniker, and people will discuss the hip hop show like it's the worst experience of all time. It's like, dude, I live in Boston. You ever been to a punk show? These dudes are throwing beers. It's like that doesn't exist in a show, but it's all part of the experience of a show. But like, it's never really talked about in the same connotation that a hip hop show is. It's like, oh, geez, I got to do this hip hop show. It's like, you know what I'm saying? And it's always this weird thing where that type of experience is just like, well, if you're good at your job, you won't get yelled at. If you're a monitor guy and you stink and you're getting your wedges blown out and the artists are cursing at you, it's like, it's not because it's a black artist or hip hop. Maybe you just stink at your gig, or you went into the gig with the wrong attitude, just assuming it was going to be a nightmare because it was hip hop. And that's like the experiences that I guess I've seen like on a very, you know, micro level. I have rarely seen anything as flagrant as like just flat out racism, being like, black people can't mix, this is bullshit. Like that's very few and far between. Even then, if it wouldn't even get to that point, because you know, I'm dealing with, you know, mostly my friends at this point. And I think when the tour comes through the door, people you kind of generally get an idea of what the tour and the vibe is. If you're working as a house guy in a club, you just know, you know what I'm saying, what you can kind of do and what you can't do, or kind of what the vibe is. So I think more and more, it's more or less the microaggressions, but at the end of the day, you just generally don't have the time or the energy bandwidth to just address every single little small microaggression, but they are there and they do exist. It's just a matter of, do you want to take the time to call somebody out and have them just ruin your day more, or just keep it moving type of thing?
I'd like to add one more. Sorry.
Please.
I'm going to just jump right in. One thing that irks me to no end and happens all the time is if I am asked a question, say if I'm mixing a band and somebody asks me like hypothetically a house gig, I'm mixing the band and somebody asks me a question and maybe the technical director will answer the question even though it was clearly directed at me.
Mhm.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Not gonna, no curse words, just, this is, if somebody asks a question and I don't know the answer, I will direct it to whoever does.
Mhm.
But if they're asking me the question and I know it and I'm stepped on in that direction, it's, they're trying to help, but they don't understand that they're silencing you at the same time. And it happens all the time, like just nonstop. So it's being really aware of not so much a hierarchy, but who is the correct person to answer the question. And, say if you see it happening, then make sure to say like, hey, Dana, direct the question by name to the person that you're asking. It's a great way to stand up for the person if you see it happening over and over again. And I've had to do that before and be very conscious of it. So don't do that.
Yeah, I was fortunate. My old tech, he teched for me for maybe, I don't know, 15 years, I think. And this year would have been my first year touring without him. But he was always people would ask him questions. He's like, you must ask the engineer.
Good.
Karrie is right over there. Go ask the engineer. And he was always very conscious of that. He could have answered the question. I would have been fine with it, but he always made the effort if it was
That's awesome.
something that
totally.
I needed to direct. So
yeah, and this being about what can we do as people who have been doing this for a while to help elevate marginalized people, to help that not be the scenario. That's a perfect way to do it. Especially if you see the dismissing happen, the lack of respect and a dismissing, like you were saying, Dana, where the question is asked to you and somebody else feels like they need to answer it because you're a female. I mean, that's just, inconceivable to begin with. But the fact that happens if somebody says, oh no, that's a question for Dana, or let Dana answer that question. That's her field of expertise. That's a great way to do it. For me, when I think my biggest hurdle in the beginning was being young, and it's been a long time since that, obviously, but I just remember being treated very poorly in the beginning, especially coming from Canada, because I had never been to the States, and Canadians can be kind of, especially I remember when I came to the States and spent a couple years and then went back and started doing some shows in Canada. I remember all the techs, all the stagehands, everyone wanting to know what you were doing, what you were using, why you're using that, being super helpful, super friendly, super involved in not, I'm not just here to lift your console up. I really like doing this. And I came from that culture in the bars in Western Canada. And so when I came to the States, I moved to Chicago, and I remember there being this very closed off, don't look at what I'm doing over here. Hey, and effing new guy, was always the thing. Like, hey, new guy, you're not ready for this, stay away. And I just felt like it took me 5 years or so of actually being on tours to where I wasn't that guy anymore. So I think that was and now that I know so many more people in the States and in the industry, I don't feel like I get that anymore, but I sure felt always kind of put in my place in the beginning.
I can
add to that.
Please.
I'm sorry. What were you gonna say, Mike?
I was going to say one thing that I was guilty of up until 3-4 years ago when I first started working with Karrie. that I wasn't even aware of, but just something as simple as saying, you know, who's your front of house guy or who's your monitor guy when you don't know the gender of that person. You know, I didn't mean anything by it, but I had to recognize the fact that that itself is exclusionary, and so I don't say that anymore. So, and I still do hear a lot of people that do still say it, and just be aware that while it may seem innocent, it is exclusionary and it can be hurtful to people that are not guys, you know. So that's just a minor one that
I still
it's
do
not
it.
even that minor though. I mean, it drives me like there was a I'm not going to mention the product or the engineers involved, but there was a webinar for sound guys, and I tried to find out who was moderating so I could write to them privately, and I couldn't. And so I just wrote on the page, I'm like, oh, maybe you should say like for sound engineers. And then I got this very terse, like, you know, several message response, like, you don't need to create this online carnage. You know, it's like, you know, the intent wasn't there. It's like, well, I literally just said, you know, why can't we just call it sound engineer webinar 101 or whatever, you know? And their response was so poisonous, and just like, it was, I mean, you know, it is like little things, and it's okay. And I'll correct people too. If they call me the sound guy, I said, no, I'm a sound engineer. And I make a point of not saying like, you know, I don't need to say sound woman, because that still others me in a way.
Right.
I say I'm a sound engineer. That's what I am. So I do appreciate it when people are do have that forethought. I understand that sound guy is like your typical term, you know. There's always a drunk guy in the audience that's like, oh, you're the sound guy, you know. I'm like, yeah. I'm kind of say something awful right there. But you know, just it for me personally, like, it might be a small thing, but it actually really irks me. It's reading Mixed magazine and seeing, you know, I flash back to ads of women in bikinis holding microphones between their breasts. And it's like, well, I'm more than that as a person, and I'm more than that as an engineer. So yeah, it is like, I mean, it all adds up. It's cumulative to a degree. So even small things can be hurtful. And I do appreciate that point being brought up. So yes, sound engineers across the board here.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think for everybody like listening at home in your own respective space, like I guess with so many microaggressions where you're in a particular, I guess, marginalized position, I think I could maybe speak for everybody saying that you have that moment where it's like, did that person mean it that way? Like you kind of have to determine whether that person, was that person trying to like be racist, sexist, or whatever the circumstances may be. And I would always just tell people to kind of trust your gut on that, because 9 times out of 10, like your own personal experience can only really dictate your boundaries in terms of, oh, that was actually meant that way type of thing. And usually your gut instinct is right. The first, and it's usually not just one isolated incident. It's like, it'll kind of catch you off guard because you're like, oh shit, I'm just here to work. I didn't expect any of that. And the offender and or offenders will usually continuously, you know, make you the target of like whatever nuances or whatever it is. And if you essentially allow yourself to be stolen, like, hey, that's the dude, we can get, you know, we can get to him today. Like, it's usually it's pretty common. You know what I'm saying? I think there's always a moment where it's like, did that person mean that? And then you'll say 3 or 4 or 5, 6, and by the end of the day, it's like undeniable that person like meant that. So generally, like I would say, trust your gut and just try to nip it in the bud as quickly as possible, so it doesn't escalate into this like discouraging day of somebody just being, you know, a jerk to you type of thing.
Yeah. And, you know, and then for the other people on the crew, they need to stand up and say, that's enough, stop, we're not, you know, like, I didn't realize this till maybe like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when I saw a friend of mine that I was on Red Hot Chili Peppers crew with. You know, we were toured together probably for 10 plus years. But he had posted something on Facebook about me, and he was like, yeah, he goes, we'd go in and the local crews would be like, they have a woman mixing monitors, whatever, you know, and they would just shut it down. They would like, yep, she's got the job, you don't. So you need to listen to her and let's load in gear. But I never knew this was going on. And they never told me, which, you know, after reading that, I was like, I'm so thankful for them because they stood up for me. They shut it down right away. And they never came and made a big deal out of it and told me. If they told me every time that had happened, I would have been self-conscious all the time, every day. I'm like, who's out to get me? Who's going to give me a hard time? And since they did that and stood up for me, I didn't have to deal with it. And I didn't know it existed, you know. I was just able to go to work and do my job. And that was huge, you know.
It's super important. I actually had a singer in a band stand up for me we were in one of the headlining slots at my favorite festival in Spain. And he saw a local stagehand treating me poorly. And, you know, my perspective is, you know, it's a self-protective measure in a sense that this is a crew that you have to depend on to get this show happening. You don't want to cause any trouble, but he actually saw what was happening, this guy talking down to me, and rushed in and, you know, said, she knows where our microphones go. She's telling you where to put the microphone. She has a shitload to do. Just, you know, she's the boss right now, so you need to listen to her. Otherwise, I would have just not been able to do my job because we didn't have a monitor engineer on that tour, so I didn't have any stage support technically, and I was just making sure everything was good before I went to front of house, and I did not have the support. And somebody on my team who happened to be the singer of the band, who certainly did not need to do anything, he recognized it and he came in to, you know, to support me and let me get my job done. So it is noted if you come in and do it, you don't, you know, have to do anything, but it really helps. If anything, just gets the show going, you know, gets the job done.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we were talking about earlier, bringing it like kind of full circle, is like, I think there's like a huge generational shift of the things that were acceptable 15 or 20 years ago when a new, you know, big up and coming tour comes in. And it's like, usually generally that stuff is nipped in the bud. If somebody's out there just being reckless and saying stuff, particularly in our case, where it's like, yo, Billy's, at the time when she started, she was only 17 or 18. So people out there being reckless, doing crazy stuff, I'm like, yo, my man, she is still a teenager. Like, take that somewhere else. Like, we're not here for that. And it's, I think that policing of what is generally acceptable now is evolved into these other territories that, you know, the rugged rock and roll industry didn't necessarily have to participate or acknowledge. And I think now that society is moving forward in a way that there's what's generally socially unacceptable has become, luckily, considerably broader than what it was 20 years ago or 15 years ago. I think the culture is starting to shift in terms of, you know, people just being mindful of saying stuff that could be, you know, considered offensive. You know what I'm saying?
I agree. I think, you know, from 30 years ago, 35 years ago when I started, it was pretty rough. I mean, you know, I was seeing it from a young, you know, a young guy, but, you know, it was pretty rough out there. And I think I'm very thankful for the fact that a lot of the drugs, a lot of the improprieties and all those things have been kind of, you know, taken out of the equation every day. You don't get the same kind of chatter from stagehands and the same kind of disrespect flying back and forth because people they just won't have it anymore. And it's, we've come a long way that way. For sure.
I mean, I would say that you do get that occasionally. It's not acceptable, but you know, it hasn't disappeared completely in my experience. No. So,
no,
you know,
yeah, I guess all I can really say is it's better.
It is better, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So we touched on it a little bit, but I just want to address it more directly, because we have a question from a viewer that was, how do you create an environment where BIPOC and LGBTQIA people feel comfortable? So I don't know if anyone wants to address.
I would say quickly, on my end, if I'm tour managing a smaller tour, I have a sheet, a document that I get everybody's, address, emergency contact, passport numbers, all that stuff. And I also ask for their desired pronouns. So just putting that out there at the beginning of the tour so that everybody knows, and making sure that if there is somebody that has a pronoun that they require, that local crews know it, everybody knows it, not in a make a big deal out of it kind of way, but just alert people who will be interacting with that person. This is what is required, and letting them know up front.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I think from the point of view of somebody coming into a tour trying to, I guess, create that environment, is basically just, I guess, sticking up for yourself and kind of let people be aware of, your boundaries. I think a lot of people are not, it's easy to joke or criticize or just be generally unaware of another person's set of circumstances. That will be a bummer. I mean, obviously what Dana said as well too, if you have the luxury to do it from the top down, that's easy, the best place to do it, and just set the rules. And like, if you are not adhering to this, then there's going to be hell to pay. But if you're coming in a situation where it's intimidating, you're a new person on the crew, I guess it's a lot easier said than done to say, put your foot down and, stick up for yourself. But I think there is room to appropriately set boundaries for people so they are aware of, hey, listen, like the last time you said this and this and this, it was kind of like, I know you meant it like this, so you're not a bad person, but at the same time, actually, this is my set of circumstances that made me take that a different way. Can we just try to like maybe chill with that? And obviously some situations warrant like a flare up or actually being a little more stern about it. And that's kind of up to the person to dictate. But I think that's really important, just letting people know like, hey, what your particular boundaries are, because either some people know, or generally sometimes they just don't, and they don't intend it. But once they know, they have the opportunity to be better. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I guess if you go, if you try to take somebody making you not feel comfortable and you push it up the ladder to sort of let's say you're on the audio crew, you take it to your audio crew chief, and if they don't have a good answer and you try to take it one step further to your production manager and they don't have a good answer, then I guess it gets very difficult. But it's like Salim said, if you have Dana as your tour manager, you got a good starting point. So I guess as things happen to you, if you try to report those things and you're not getting anywhere, it's going to be a tough ride for you.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a bigger point of what options do we have on tours to address behavior that we don't feel safe working. So, and each tour is different, and each production manager is different, and each audio crew chief is different. So, all I can say is I hope that in this time of COVID, where people are re-evaluating and looking over their safety measures and their crew manuals, and that they're seriously starting to take some of these issues seriously, instead of, and I think it is getting better, but even 5 years ago, I still heard, well, I'm not going to hire women because I don't have the time to deal with drama or anything that could possibly happen having a woman out on tour. So we're not going to hire any, right? That's not the way to address it. The way to address it is to have a very clear path of, like any other workplace, of how you're going to address certain situations, and that it's going to be consistent, right?
Right.
That when you come in, just because the production manager's had a bad day and is in a bad mood, instead they should say, I want to listen to you. I want to hear you. This is not the time. Can we address this tomorrow morning or whatever? But not just to go, I can't deal with this right now. Get out of my office, which a lot of production managers do, which that's why I'm not a production manager, because I don't want to deal with those things. But, you know, and each person on the audio, whoever's the audio crew chief or whoever's the lighting crew chief, those are people that are supposed to be taking care of the employees for the vendor, right? So they should have a plan before they go out on tour of how they're going to deal with any situations that arise, and a clear policy of what is accepted and what's not. And and then as a crew on a whole, everybody should be supporting each other and, have everybody's back all the time. I'm like, that is not cool. We're not doing that.
I think one other thing as well too, since the industry is so small, I have, in the instance where something is gone awry, like I've had people reach out to me, or just a friend or a particular person that's like, hey, I've had this horrible experience with this particular tour manager. It's like, usually, since the industry is so small, there's another person the quote unquote offender probably has somebody that they respect, or they're probably like, if you were to reach out and say, this person's been terrible, if you put the feelers out to actually find somebody that can hold them accountable to actually change their behavior and kind of like, I guess, parent them, for lack of a better term, is like another way to manage a situation where we feel like there's no outs, you know what I mean? It's like, if this person is being mean to you, like if you reach out to like your other friends in the industry, it might be able to get up the chain or around the people that are on the field that are kind of being the gatekeeper for actually something getting done. You know what I'm saying? If it has to come down to the management to be like, yo, you're representing my artist's tour, and I'm hearing stuff on the road from like all these other people that you're actually being low-key the worst, like we need to make some changes type of thing. And it's like just another way to handle the situation. Like we were saying, Jim, like if you kind of hit a brick wall in terms of where to go, in terms of resources, and nothing is actually getting done, that's another set of, circumstances that can actually potentially help somebody be accountable for being the worst if they're not trying to change the culture on their own.
Right. And sometimes you just gotta, I've done it, sometimes you just gotta stand up, this goes along with what Jim was saying of being picked on for being the new guy. It can get really, on the surface, it sounds like, oh, well, that's not a big deal. We were just calling you the new guy. We still call our front of house engineer the new guy, and he gets super upset about it, and he's been there for like 15 years now. He's not the new guy, but we keep doing it because he gets upset. But I've been on, and we're doing it in a joking way. But sometimes it's like, okay, cool it. He can't deal with this today, right? But I've been on tour where they are the new guy, and he's, the PA tech trying to fly PA, and they're just on his case all day long.
Yeah, not safe.
All the radio chatter is just like, so-and-so, and this, and this, and that, and it's like, and I just go, guys, you gotta cool it. He's trying to learn. Will you teach him instead of just yelling at him all day? Because you're breaking him. We don't want to break anybody on tour. It serves no purpose.
And it's the one thing we've all been, right? Like,
right.
I haven't been a woman and felt what that's like to be on tour, but all of us have been the new one, the new person, it's and it's, so it's like you said, we have to stand up for each other, because it's got to start with the people around you. And if you get support there, I think that culture gets weeded out, at least for the day, with the locals. But if people aren't standing up for you, it's going to be a rough day.
We all know what a small industry this is. So I think, to Salim's point, make people's transgressions known, and give, obviously I think everyone deserves an opportunity to improve and to atone and apologize and whatever needs to be done. But if that's not happening, then make it public and let them know, and that will affect their ability for future employment. And that's really the best weapon that we have to weed people out. There were times in my career, especially when I was early in production management, where I was not acting right. I mean, it wasn't marginalizing people, but I was trying to lead by fear and authoritarianism instead of by, you know, mutual respect. And people called me out on it, and it affected my ability to work. And so I took a look at myself, and I, you know, put a lot of work into making an adjustment, and, you know, realized the error of my ways. And but it, you know, it thankful, you know, even though they were saying, you know, negative things about me, I am thankful to those people for, you know, helping me to improve. You know, I think, you know, going back to the question of creating a positive environment for everyone, I think the most important thing is to have a universal respect and to treat everyone the same. You know, I think a lot of times we focus so much on the groups that we are drawing lines ourselves. You know, you're like, oh, well, you know, our engineer is a woman, you know, and you're trying to celebrate that fact, but why do you have to even mention it? You know, you're just drawing those lines over and over again, you know. If you make everyone the same as best as possible, then, you know, it just starts to smooth that out.
So one question I would put out there is, you know, drawing it back down to smaller tours where you don't have production managers or crew chiefs and whatnot. You know, how do you, when you take these offenses day by day and say like you're the only person on the crew, say like if you're tour managing doing front of house, you have a merch person driving the van, and then you have the band. Obviously, unless you're really tight with the band, which, you know, I have been in the past, sometimes you just don't want to put that into their environment. And, you know, yeah, they have enough to worry about with everything else. I feel like definitely having some kind of backup, administrative backup, whether it's of your own devices, like saying to the manager or booking agent, whatever your resource is, saying like, hey, I'll check in and let you know how everything's going once in a while. Just starting that kind of camaraderie, that communication might be helpful. But it's a little bit weirder when you're in like a small, like if you're in a single bus or even a van tour with a trailer, you know, you might not have these options to, you know, put that vibe out there with those close quarters, you know, band and crew on one bus, or just everybody smashed in a van and you're the only crew, for example. I would say that's how I started out, being the only crew person. So any ideas on how to maybe address it in that sense, to just protect yourself and your sanity a little bit? Because I know I've been in positions, if I didn't have at least a friend back home to text and get it all out in, you know, 40 characters or less, you know, I have had days where I've questioned, why the hell am I here if I'm just going to be abused, you know?
I mean, management is always kind of the last line of defense, that them and the band, you know, but communication with the band is often difficult. But one of the most powerful tools that I realized that never even considered as an option in the beginning of my career was to remove myself from the situation. And that's the greatest power that you have. And although, yes, it's going to affect your income and things like that, what I learned is that your sanity and the purity of your heart and your position, and not compromising yourself, is much more powerful than the income. I would rather, you know, take a, you know, quote unquote normal job than do some of the tours and, you know, endure some of the conditions that I have in the past. I just wouldn't do it. When I was young, I was like, well, I don't have a choice. This is my job. I just have to tolerate this. And I would tell young people, you don't have to tolerate it. There are other careers, there are other things. Mm-hmm. And even, you know, it's going to affect your wallet, but it's your person is much more important and more valuable than any career is.
Yeah, but, you know, that's super hard decision for a lot of people to make.
It is. Know? Yeah, I'm not trying to trivialize it. I know it's difficult, right. But that's why I'm.
You know, and that's why I think really tours on all levels, whether it is just a band and one crew person or two crew people in a van, at that point, the band is the boss, right? So whether it's the band as boss or all the way back up the chain where the band is the boss again, you know, of a huge touring thing, is these people need to, the people that are in charge of protecting the crew need to take these things seriously and make sure that no one on their tour feels like, I'm not safe, I'm not respected, I'm being bullied, I have to quit and leave.
I actually
have to find another career, right?
Well, I've taken myself off of a tour once after I did take my concerns to the management and nothing was done.
Right.
And then we were stuck in Europe in a really, I was stuck in Europe with a band that I loved, but with a really hostile, everyday attitude from the tour manager. And I mean, I was literally physically getting sick every morning just before having to go to the van. And it's, you know, I've since heard that person's in occupational therapy, so good for them. You know, we can all learn from our mistakes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, these are some things that, you know, you shouldn't expect from any tour, but can happen, I would say. You know, being prepared for this eventuality of feeling, you know, if things go wrong, to feel a little bit powerless against it, I guess, especially mid-tour. You can't just leave a tour in the middle of a tour. You'll never get another job, I feel like. You know, it is a small world. So, you know, in these smaller situations, in any situation, I would say, find your ally who's going to at least listen to you and let you rant at the end of the night, for sure. But yeah, the smaller situations, I feel like it gets a little bit hazy. Management is protecting the band, not necessarily the crew. And, you know.
Sometimes management is the most toxic entity in the entire organization.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Right.
I think
and a lot
dealt with that.
A lot of people have you know, had to go through decades of abuse to get to their position. So they just look at you sometimes and go, hey, you're just going to have to get over it. If you want to be in this business, this is how, this is what it's like. Because I felt like that a lot. You know, I felt like there was always someone on the crew for the first several years that I toured in the States. There was always someone kind of grumpy, always leaving a bad mark with the locals, and we would kind of apologize for that person, then turn on us or turn on me, and I would try to say, hey, why is this guy like this? Oh, well, yeah, that's just the way he is. You're gonna have to get used to it if you want to make it, you know.
I think one of the other things too, and relative to Dana's point in terms of like the size of the actual tour, if you're in the theater, the 1,500 cap to 2,000, 3,000 cap club, those particular tours and types of, like, I guess, touring entities artist wise, you'd be surprised how small the crew community is for tours of that size. So I think more people should be diligent of just like jumping on a message board or putting feelers out and generally, you know, getting a good idea of what the culture of a specific tour is, because the information is generally out there if you just actually reach out in one touch. And like she was saying, kind of, you know, form your allies, whether it's in the tour or when you're off of tour. I think everybody, the one thing about the music business or just the touring industry in general, that it doesn't seem to have a ton of structure for somebody who's just getting into it, but you'd be surprised how much once you are into it, how easy it is to just, you know, one touch to get a resource or actually, you know, do background checks on a tour or a person through 1 or 2 degrees of separation type of thing. And then I find myself more and more as I've gotten, you know, deeper into the business, how many dots connect, but also being willing to share, you know, that knowledge of like, oh, that person is actually super sweet and promoting somebody else's situation when their name comes up across for, you know, versus actually that person was trash. That is consistent with what I've heard about. They're absolutely like, what you heard is consistent with what I've heard do some more research, see if they've, but then at the very least, I think a lot of people have more power than they give themselves credit for to find out what a tour is like before they make that plunge. Because unfortunately, I think regardless, it's sad to say, regardless of whatever your career path is, if you're marginalized, you're going to deal with some type of stuff that's a bummer. And it's like, I wish it wasn't like that. But I think more that you can control as much of it as you can if you're actually equipped with the right, tools and kind of check the right boxes type of thing.
I would say that on one of my big tours, on the vice versa side of that, is that I was on a tour that was very toxic, my first big tour, and I was probably giving off miserable vibes the whole time because I was being treated like shit the whole time, And then actually a couple years after that tour, I met up with the LD. I happened to be in her city, and I put her on the guest list for a festival, and she actually apologized to me, for the way that tour went for me. They saw how it was going, and she had her own issues, that like physical health issues that she was dealing with. So she apologized for not standing up for me at that time, and and that made all the difference. But gosh, I mean, I hope people, I'm sure it's happened, but I'm sure that it's been like, oh, she was miserable on that tour and not fun to work with at all because she didn't talk to anybody after a while because I was being abused. So I mean,
That'll do it.
Taking things with a grain of, yeah, exactly, but taking things with a grain of salt and like trying to learn a little bit, get a broad view of who that person is or who that tour is, because maybe that tour, something bad happened in somebody's life, and it all trickles down when you're on tour. You're living together in the smallest apartment with 13 other people. So, do your research for sure. Yeah.
I would say, I would equate it to being in a bad relationship. If a lot of people find themselves trapped in a bad relationship, they don't want to leave because they don't want to be alone and they don't want to hurt and things like that. But that doesn't make it, those situations don't make it any less healthy. And so I think sometimes your only option is to leave. If you've tried therapy and you've tried talking, you've tried, those things aren't working sometimes. And, I've only quit one tour in the middle, but it didn't affect my career because I had a good reason. There was toxic, unsafe drug use. There was, conditions that were not acceptable at any level. And I made that widely known. Like, yes, I left this tour, but here's why.
Right.
And no one can fault me for not risking my life for a drug-addled, rock singer. I just wasn't willing to do it, and I would do the same thing over again. I didn't just say, F you guys, I'm out of here, and walk out the door in the middle of a show day. I did it responsibly, but I did say, okay, here's my concerns. This is not okay. And when they said, well, that's just the way it is, you're being a crybaby about it. That's not the word that they used. I almost said the word that they used, but that's probably not the venue to do that. So I said, all right, well, then this will be my last, this is my last segment. I'm going to excuse myself. I will fill out my commitment to the end of 3 weeks from now, and then you better find someone else because I will not be here when we reconvene. And I as painful as that was, and I was super worried about am I going to be branded as a quitter, and
right.
Is it going to affect my ability to work? It didn't at all. People, I think quite the opposite actually. People were like, oh yeah, that tour is disgusting. Like if you had stayed on that tour and that condition acceptable to you, then we wouldn't want you on our tour because clearly there's something
right
with you. Like if this is what is okay to you, then you don't belong with us. And that so I was afraid, but it turned out to be unwarranted. And I just wanted to tell people that if you find yourself in those situations, don't be terrified that it's going to end your life. It's never as drastic as you think it's going to be.
And tours like that, crew turns around a lot on those tours.
Yep.
Toxic tours that no one wants to be on. So it's goes back to what Salim is saying, do your homework. You can find out what tour you don't want to be on.
I quit a tour. I was on a tour like that, but it was the first time that the tour went south. So we were all of the crew were on a learning curve, and I was not the first person to quit, and I wasn't the last person to quit. So if somebody quits before you, just know it's probably okay. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
I think it's like an overarching thing as well too. I feel, I guess if you are a younger person and like trying to get into the business, I'd be careful who you align yourself with as well too. Because I know a lot of people that are like really, really good at their jobs, they pick up a lot of really crappy habits from their mentor, and they're not adaptable, they're not nimble, and then they just take that particular type of learning experience and mentality as the word of God. And that's one of my personal aspirations is to Nicole Massey is our production manager. I think she's one of the best in the business. And I'm very fortunate to actually oh, wow, like this is how it's supposed to be done. To me now, there is no other way. Like any other way that it's done, it's like, it's not meeting what my expectations are. So I think just having that perspective, I feel very fortunate in that regard. But I think a lot of people don't have the proper barometer to determine is this a bad habit? Is this toxic? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And I think when you're starting out early, you kind of have to be realistic with yourself about why are you in this business? Like, what do you want to do? Like, because if you're on the crew, it's not sexy. It's not like if your aspiration to be in a crew is to be with the band doing band stuff, it's like cutting out the vibe, you know what I'm saying? Because you're the crew, you're there to work. And you kind of have to know where to draw the distinction of why are you in this business? And if that's what you're trying to do and trying to be, you kind of have to look inward and, maybe pivot or reevaluate why you're doing it. I think a lot of people's expectations outside of, the barriers and what could get you discouraged is just not necessarily a lot of the time is realistic. But like I said, I think learning the proper habits from the right people. And I think as a culture, I feel like fortunately it is changing because there's conversations where people can sit down and say, this is my experience, it needs to change, versus 10 years ago, you'd just be like, shut up and go to work and keep your head down.
Right.
Right. I remember when I started, like I said, moving from Canada to Chicago, it seemed like all the guys who got all the mixing gigs and had all the, the trust of the owners and the bands, and they were always these grumpy, loudmouth, talking down to people, engineers. And I kind of thought for a while, I guess this is how I'm supposed to act, for people to take me seriously as an engineer. Like if I'm patient and I'm nice to stagehands and I'm kind of kind to the people around me, that's kind of not what I'm seeing. And these guys have all the gigs, so maybe this is what I have to learn. I mean, I seriously thought that for a while, and after a while, I realized, and I think meeting that first front of house person at a show when you're maybe on their tour and you're sort of an assistant or you're a third or fourth person on the audio crew, and you meet this person who's so nice to everyone, and then they mix a killer show and you're finally like, oh wow, that's so great, because I can emulate this person now. I don't have to think that these grumpy people are the way to go. So yeah, for sure. If you act toxic because you think that's the way it's supposed to be, then yeah, you're gonna find yourself out of work pretty soon.
Yeah.
Changed a lot. I have a question here. What is the best way to approach management when you notice you are on an all-white crew and you're not looking to get anyone fired, you're just wondering why there's no people of color on the tour? I would say, being a production manager, the thing that I would recommend is recommend someone to the crew. I mean, if we ever had an opening on the crew, I didn't go out taking resumes and go, I tried to find someone that someone knew, because we're all a family, you want to have somebody. So the best thing that you can do is, mentor and make friends with people in marginalized groups and help them get jobs by recommending them. That would be the most powerful thing that I would say. But I'd love to hear what everyone else's take is.
Yeah, and that's what I did at the beginning of the year. I just went through my personal references and updated them to include people from different groups. So I wasn't referring the same for male engineers that I typically refer. So I think everybody can do that in their own personal references, and I think that will make a huge difference, because even if they don't get hired, now their name's in the pool, and whoever you gave it to, they'll pass it along to somebody else. Now, Karrie gave me these names. I couldn't use them, but maybe they're available for your thing. And just keep doing that. You know, I'm not saying to refer someone that you don't know.
Right. That's dangerous.
But everybody can go through and go, I know. You can find someone that you know that you can recommend, or you can recommend. I think we do it all the time. I haven't worked with them, but Dana has, and Dana swears by them. Sometimes that's all it takes to get someone a gig.
I'll definitely, I have a little group of friends that we all kind of circulate jobs if we can't take them. And hey, do you know somebody that can fill this? That's, somebody's good for the job, but also maybe just let's give our sisters and us a chance to fill this job. I mean, it's definitely on our radar at this point. So yeah, little crew, we talk.
You think about, the question is, what can you do about it? Well, sometimes by the time you get to the first rehearsal and you meet the whole white male lighting crew and the whole white male video crew and and you're kind of like, oh, I guess it's kind of late. So I guess just within your own circles, if you're a front of house engineer and you're talking with a sound company and saying, so what names are you going to put forward for the audio crew? And they say, well, it's this person, this person, this person. And you realize that's 3 or 4 white males. You can maybe say, hey, what do we have any other options that might bring some diversity to the crew? And, when it's super busy, sometimes you don't get the choices, but I think within your core group, you can try to make a recommendation or some influence.
Yeah, and if, like you said, you show up on a load-in day of production rehearsal, and the crew is set, but they don't stay set very long usually. Not on every tour. There's a high likelihood that there'll be an opening somewhere at some point, and then that's there's probably nothing you can do on that day. Making waves on day one and trying to reinvent a crew from the bottom is probably not a good career move on day one. But opportunities do arise, and that's when you should spring into action. And also, and most importantly, have a pool of resources to pull from when those opportunities do arise. So that you're just like, well, I only know 3 people, and they're all the same, kid. That's what. I started hitting up Karrie because people ask me all the time, and now I just look at the EQL and the other resources that they have so kindly built. But for a while, I was just sending her text messages like, "Hey, I got this thing. Like, who would you recommend?" So I think it's important that you build those resources and have them, at hand, so that when opportunities do arise, you're ready to use them.
Yeah. I think helping people connect dots, because unfortunately, I don't feel like a lot of tour. I mean, it's hard to say because I never actually personally sat down and been a fly on the wall and heard like this, Dr. Eva, like, we're not hiring any Black people or any women or people of color. Like, I've never heard those scenarios. And I think a lot of it, frankly, just comes down to like what people are familiar with and kind of who they trust in terms of recommendations. So I think helping people expand their actual inner circle in terms of who are options with people that are, people of color and women and everything, in between, I think is helpful. and kind of helping them connect the dots, doing the intros before those decisions are actually made. Because like Jim was saying, by the time you get to the tour, it's already too late, and like, I guess the door and the window is already closed. So if there's a production rehearsal opportunity or whatever, where it's low key and you can actually bring the homie by or bring people by that you think would vibe, it's like start getting their face familiar with the people in the crew. So when it's time to, oh my God, we have a fire drill, somebody left, and it's like, oh, yo, remember my homie that was here? You know what I'm saying? It's production rehearsal. He actually is good, this, and this. And it's just like, all right, cool, you trust him, boom, he's in. It's like, it's not as easy as like, you know, you're picking your team for dodgeball a lot of the time. It's just you going with what's working and kind of what's available to you. And I don't think if people are consciously being like, I'm not hiring any people of color. So I think, I wish it was, I'd say you probably have more power to help change that than you would actually think, by just having your friends and the people you trust participate whenever it's appropriate. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I would say to people who feel marginalized, and that the door is never open, and you know, for long or at the right time, if you have friends like the people who are on this panel, and you
Froze.
you're
Come back, Jim.
by, and you know, oh,
you froze. You said if you have people on this panel, and then it was just like a static shot of your face.
No, I just say, if you feel marginalized, just stay in touch with people. Like, keep, you know, if you have a champion out there, someone who's on a tour, and you're like, you know, this person's always so nice to me and trying to be so helpful. If you aren't working, let them know. If you just got a gig, let them know. You know, stay in touch, so that when that window of opportunity is there, they're like, hey, I just talked to that person like last week, I know they're free, kind of thing. So it's a quick response.
Especially when you're new in the industry, staying fresh in someone's mind is the best tool. I mean, things that would be considered pestering in other industries are kind of the norm in this business, I think.
Right.
Like,
That's how I got my start.
That's when people ask me, how do I get into this all the time? I said, you have to go bug someone until they just, you know, can't
Like I said, I didn't go to school or anything, but I definitely offered my what skills I had for free at the beginning, and I just said, hey, I'm always around.
Yep.
And actually, my first big tour came because I was working as a journalist for a blog, and I went to go cover a band that I was constantly bugging about letting me do sound for them, and they were having a really bad sound night, as it were, and there was a second show, and they're like, you're doing sound for the next set. And then I went on tour with them. So, you know, put yourself out there. It's just, you know, people will let you know when you're bothering them, you know. It's okay.
I've gotten several month-long major tours before, because when the tour director from the sound company came down the stairs, I happened to be the first, like the closest one to the door. Which is not something that I'm necessarily proud of, but it's kind of, they feel like if you're
it's a skill.
If you're in the building, then we all have pretty much the same qualifications and we can do the job. So you come down and they're like, hey, you free? Yep. All right, go. And then
Exactly.
No, honestly, that's how I got my first assistant engineering job at Green Street. I was there, and it was after a 12-hour night management shift, and I went in for 24 hours. You know, that's, you know, part of the job. Just go in and do it, you know.
I think it's considerably easier now, because I think one of the other panels that we were on, like, what's the big change? And I think now everybody's accessible. Like, nobody is on the go. Like, you could actually get in touch with like your favorite engineer or the people that you perceive as the gatekeeper through social media. There's so many levels that are unlocked. Like, I think everybody on this panel, like my first internship was going down to the Paradise, and it was just like, hey man, I'll work for free, I don't care. It's just like, cool, you got the gig, start grabbing gear. And that was, you know what I'm saying, what it was. And that was the same thing with Lupo's. I would drive down to Lupo's, the old one in Rhode Island, that was connected to the Met, and just would, you know, intern there and just do my thing. But it was, you know, a 45-minute drive, but it was just that willingness to kind of, you know, humble yourself, but also to put yourself in that position where you can just be around people that are learning, or just be around people that are learning, type of thing.
And I just want to say that we all know that this summer accepted, obviously, every summer there's a mad dash and there's never enough people. I mean, I can't even tell you how many calls that I get in a normal July, like, I need a guitar tech or I need a monitor engineer. And it's like, dude, everyone's out. Like there's, I don't know anybody. And so if you have an interest in this industry, especially if you're in a marginalized group, there is room for you. Come, come put the work in. And because I know one of the biggest problems that I had when I was hiring, I wanted to hire more diverse. I love having females on the crew because it just, as we said before, it changes the dynamic. And I think that's important just to have a healthy, balanced environment. But a lot of times what I wanted didn't matter. Just the inventory wasn't there. There wasn't somebody. And, when I was regularly PMing tours, the EQL and these other resources didn't exist. So I'm very thankful for them now, and I hope everybody uses them. But, back then I knew what I wanted to hire, but it wasn't possible. We definitely need more young people coming up and filling these spots. They don't even have to be young people. You're never too old to go for it. So please come join us.
Yeah.
if you're a sadist like all of us and want to dedicate your life to punishment.
We're all well rested now, so
we're ready for it.
We're ready for some more.
We were talking about this last week, and somebody mentioned it earlier. We're in an unprecedented situation, and hopefully there's a silver lining in that. In this quiet time, we can reset and try and fix some of these things. Normally, we're going 1,000,000 miles an hour all the time, and you're just in damage control mode all the time. And now that there's finally quiet, just things like this, I think, are invaluable in addressing things that have just been bleeding away for decades. That there's just been no time and resource to address them, and we have that time now, and we need to seize that moment and make our industry better.
Yeah.
Has anybody got any final thoughts they want to share? I really appreciate everyone's attendance and attention, and I feel honored to spend 2 hours with such wonderful and intelligent people that I respect. So,
yeah, same likewise. It's a pleasure every time.
Absolute pleasure.
Where's Jerry? Where's Jerry?
Jerry got a gig. So
what? There's gigs.
Jerry, we miss you, Jerry Lopez, but you're off earning money doing your gigs.
Yeah. I said, is it an audio gig?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna assume that it is. We're gonna go with that.
We're gonna hope there's an audio gig.
Yeah. But I guess I will say to the people that are listening, at least I'll offer, you know what I'm saying, if you want to reach out to me on social media or any other way, just to offer perspective or just a general conversation on, anything you kind of have on your mind. Like I enjoy talking to people in that context to give my perspective, because I've had the luxury of people kind of, when I didn't know which way was upright, left, or down, I luckily had enough people around me that were as generous with their time to just say, hey, this is the game, do this and this, tell me your story, and then here's the advice that I would give, type of thing. So
yeah, and you can always reach out to Sound Girls, and we will do our best to help with whatever we can.
Yeah, I'm easy to find, so same.
Me too. Yeah. Not on social media, but you can definitely find me.
Yeah.
Shady.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I felt
no coffee, no social media.
I felt like I had to really bug someone to get my first job, and I do feel like I talk to a lot of folks who are in positions to hire. So yeah, reach out to me, tell me your story. I'd like to be more educated on this myself. So please do.
Quick plug, we were talking about the importance of education and quality education and inclusive education. Jim, you want to tell us about your project that you're launching next week?
Oh yeah, the Mix Institute. So I live in kind of Greenville, South Carolina area, and I, like all of us here on this panel, I think, have a huge passion for education and for teaching. So while things are slow and a lot of these venues are open, we're gonna do a little mixing school. It's kind of like not an audio 101 school, but it's a school to help a lot of, mostly House of Worship folks is the focus, but anyone can come for sure. And it's it's going to be in the format of like a 1-day 8-hour workshop. And so check it out, themixinstitute.com. Come and visit.
Thanks, Jim. And that brings up a good point too. If you're a churchgoer, you should be in that audio production ministry, because that is an awesome place. And I spend a lot of time talking to and training House of Worship crews, and they are very inclusive and very positive. It's volunteer based, in my experience anyway. So that's a great resource. Even if you're not a churchgoer, they're always looking for help, and they're lovely people, and they've got really nice toys that you can play with.
Yeah.
They do.
They tend to have budgets, don't they?
Yeah. It's a great place to learn, because most people are nice. They're not going to be too hard on you. If you make a mistake or two, you usually get to shadow for a while. So
Yeah.
I agree with that for sure.
Such a good idea.
Yep. So check out your local House of Worship. There's rock churches everywhere. Well, thanks so much, everyone. It was awesome. We'll be back next week. With round 2. We hope to see you all there, and have a great day, everyone.
Yeah.
Awesome. Take care. Thank you guys so much,
Thank you.
everyone.
Guys, thank you.
Bye.